Labour MP Seema Malhotra, you were on the front bench, you're Shadow Minister for Business and Consumers. Your dad ran a family shop. I read that he sold everything from school uniforms to jewellery. Did the experience of living in the family shop, did it influence how you come up with policies to support small businesses?
The experience of growing up in a small shop in our community really did influence me, and it's a set of memories that I still have. We grew up as a family of 8, 5 children, my parents and my grandmother living above the shop. So it was something that we had in our lives every day. And it was an experience where I really do think it gave me a sense of being on the front line in a community. You know, people came in to buy the school uniforms or to buy thread from our Gutermann, rack, if people remember Gutermann thread.
No.
But also, well, it's funny, we still have the rack in the garage. But it was one of those experiences where you really were in the community. People young and old came in. It was where I learned to go out and about with my father, because he was like an old-fashioned salesman as well. He was importing jewellery and clothes from India. So he used to have a suitcase that he used to put in the boot of the car and go out to shops in Leatherhead and Guildford and really show his samples and get orders. And I used to sometimes go with him as like a 5 or 6-year-old. And equally in the shop, when we were serving customers, I remember my mum testing me on my arithmetic when I had to calculate how much change to give the customer when they give us 50p and it was for 37p. All those experiences I think are really significant, because they do remind me of what it was like to live in a shop. I never thought about it much at the time, but it was there day and night. We never really got away. Family income and business income is really interconnected, an issue that I see a lot today. And if the business isn't doing well, nor is the family income. I found out later, because your parents never taught you about these things, but we were almost always overdrawn. It's the reason why, we never had a family holiday when we were young. In fact, our family holiday was a day trip to the seaside on the August bank holiday. And we used to make a packed lunch in the morning, and it would be this whole exciting thing where we would go off for a few hours. My dad would pick a different seaside that we hadn't been to before. And I never thought about it, but that was our reality. I was one of those kids that probably didn't go outside of the square mile in which they lived. And the way in which a small business and running that in a community really takes the whole of the family and is part of your life is one of the reasons why I think we need to take family businesses and community businesses and their needs so much more seriously, because they are on the front line and they do need government support. And they ought to be, in my view, at the heart of any plan for growth of our high streets and our communities.
And you have the word consumers in your job title. Now, any consumer right now is feeling ripped off every time they leave the house, open a bill. How are you going to help them?
Consumers are right to feel ripped off, and we have got a government under which we have seen a weakening of consumer protections. If you take as one example the cuts to trading standards teams, you've seen a cuts of over 50%. If you look at some of the challenges we've got right now, new challenges of vapes on our high streets that are, a third of which are not meeting the current tobacco regulations. This is in part because we've got porous borders. We do not have the checks that we need. We do not have the infrastructure. Therefore, we've got unsafe products in our communities. But also the issues come wider than that, because when you go online, as a lot of people do with their shopping online, there are major issues with things like fake reviews, where people are buying products that aren't what they are expected to be. They don't have that consumer experience. The government's been far too slow at bringing in fake reviews, and the new bill that's coming into Parliament now that I'm working on, the Digital Markets Competition and Consumers Bill, I absolutely believe has to tackle that issue, because consumers are paying a lot more than they should for goods because of these fake reviews. But also subscription traps. I mean, which estimates that, or in Citizens Advice, that this could be costing over £300 million a year in people buying products that they don't want. And there's got to be a tightening up of those rules, like in the way that Labour's called for, so you have much more opt-in rather than being, opting out, having to cancel. So things should be done with people's permission, with transparency, and we need much more clarity over and certainty over how people are being charged and protection for consumers around that.
Now, we started this interview by talking about your dad. He is no longer with us. He had cancer, died nearly a decade ago. What sort of caring role did you have towards the end of his life, I guess?
Well, I had caring roles both for my father in his cancer, but also my mother, who had 3 strokes, and she passed away last year. I think what people underestimate when you have a member of the family that's got terminal illness or life-changing illnesses, how much it takes from the rest of the family, how much you have to juggle your work and your time and your energy and your own family commitments. And I remember when he was diagnosed, when the family's told, there was a lot of time that went in trying to make life just a bit easier for my father and my mother, taking him to the hospital appointments, juggling that with being in Parliament. I would yo-yo sometimes twice a day, which means going from the constituency to Parliament and back and then into Parliament. And when we had late night votes and so on, I would, if he was in hospital, be going into hospital on my way back, whether it was 9 or 10 at night, just to check up on how things were. And just say goodnight, some of the basics. And I think at those times you also have to take care of the partner. My mum stopped looking after herself because she's so focused on my dad. And in some ways, that cumulative impact over a period of months led to some of the health conditions that also led to her strokes in due course. And so the way in which we have to think about care, in my view, and the way we have to think about having some greater flexibility to reduce the stress on the carers with the work they still have to do and the work they still want to do is really important for how we design a care system that's fit for the workforce and the society that we have today and of tomorrow. I think with slightly different experience with my mother with her strokes, and that was much more intense. When it came to her last days, I think it was very different because she had to be at home with 24/7 care. And so this was at the start of last year, where you're having to set up people who are strangers going into your family home, your parents' home, with your mum on her own, and suddenly faced with a bill of £8,000 a month because you have to pay for that care day and night. And, for the first 6 weeks after,
How much? Say that?
It was £8,000 a month that was the bill. And that was including me doing overnight 3 nights a week, and then other family members coming in for a few hours. But £8,000 wouldn't be unheard of for a month, and that's with extra family support because you have day and night care. And so it was juggling that and making sure that she was on board with it all. It became very stressful for her because she knew it was it's my dad's savings that was going towards her care. But it was very stressful on top of everything else to know how much it was costing. So I think beyond that, it was also, how do you trust people who are coming in? Some of them were new. Then there was instability with the workforce, the retraining, the making sure they've got cultural awareness as well, how she likes her food, what the different food is, and so on. So many things need to be taken into account for a proper care system in our country. But it taught me a great deal. I'm very fortunate I had the chance to look after them in their final days, but it does really take a whole family to look after someone, when they're older, and a whole health system that needs to be geared up to really understand the needs, not just of the older person, but also the families.
You're of Indian descent. Have you ever experienced racism in your life?
I have experienced racism in my life. We are of Indian heritage, but I was born in Hammersmith and grew up in Hounslow. And look, there are some experiences that I know young people in my constituency are still facing. This was when we would go down the local high streets. I would expect as a child someone would spit at us, or something would be thrown in our way, or there would be some sort of comment. It happens at bus stops. It happens sometimes in school. And you know, it just, I think, made us as a family just be a little bit more insular. You know, my parents weren't so comfortable with us going out and knowing where we were going and those sorts of things. But and then when you get older, you know, it's still there in different ways. When I got elected in my by-election at the end of 2011, the BNP stood a candidate, and they had a big lorry on Feltham High Street where they blared out not to vote for Seema because she's got 2 passports. Now, I've only ever had 1 passport, and it's British, and I was born in Hammersmith Hospital. But what can you do on election day when you have, you know, such hostility and untruths? You know, on the one hand, you know, I was really angry about it. On the other hand, you know, as someone said to me on the day, well, at least you can't hear half of what they're saying, but all people can hear is your name. So, you know, whether it contributed to me getting a bigger majority, I have no idea. But it is, you know, in different ways in my casework that I'm also still seeing racism appearing, whether it's in employment related issues or crime or hostility between neighbours. Racism is very clear and apparent in so many different ways in our society, and we need a zero tolerance to it.
Now, when I was doing my research, started looking online, and I found out that you share a name with somebody who was in the Real Housewives of Cheshire. Has there ever been any embarrassing moments? Has anybody ever confused you with her?
Well, it's been mostly on Twitter, where occasionally I get tweets saying how great she looks. And look, I'll totally take that one. And just to say that I've never met her, but I've always wanted to.
Brilliant. Seema Malhotra, a pleasure. Thank you.
Lovely to join you.